Welcome back to the Treatment Room Secrets podcast. Today we're joined by Dr. Emma Jones, a UK-trained physician whose work blends solid medical training with a holistic, person-centered approach to women's health. Emma's clinical interests span hormones, circadian rhythm, nutrition, medicines, and the impact of trauma, all viewed through a feminist lens. In this episode, she shares her journey and the philosophy that guides her work supporting women toward deeper physical and emotional well-being.
So we are live. Dr. Emma Jones, thank you for being here with me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Happy to be here.
Yeah, super excited to talk to you. A while back, I was sent your book, and I mentioned to you that I read through a good chunk of it. And, I'll start maybe with that, maybe just the title of the book that was, from the get-go, I think a bit fun to pick up and start reading, and then I'll mainly because of the word Phoenix is in there. And maybe since I don't know if it's Harry Potter or what exactly got me into that Phoenix fascination when I was a kid. But anytime I see Phoenix, it is there's something kind of inspiring. When thinking of the myth of the Phoenix. So I'd like to ask you. The name of the book is The Phoenix Blueprint. So where does that come into play for you?
Yeah, it's really powerful imagery, isn't it? Right. And I think that this mythology of this creature that gets burned and then rises from the ashes as a new thing is a really powerful mythic paradigm that's so empowering to think, whatever it is that we've been through is just the fires by which we're going to become a new version of ourselves. And so, of course, I attach to that. I do also love Harry Potter. I love all kinds of mythologies and good storytelling of all kinds. So I think that I definitely picked up on that. And then the other half of the title is the blueprint. And that really came from this idea that, we all kind of have a blueprint for our lives. There's a basic structure with which we're living. And that many of us, I know I was, and many people who followed the traditional pathway toward medicine, I'm a medical doctor, physician in the US, that's fairly prescribed. And there was a blueprint that at some point we picked up and just started following it. And then many of us found ourselves saying, is this even the life I want to be on? I feel like I'm following someone else's plans. So we do need blueprints. We do need plans for life. We really can't just live in a totally loose, unstructured fashion. But we need to make sure, or what I try to put forth in the book is that we're living a life by our own design or by our own blueprint. So when we put these two things together, we kind of have both. We can rise stronger from our challenges, or in my case, the specific challenge of burnout in the healthcare system. And then we can design a life of our own choosing, which then allows us to continue to do that hard work. Healthcare environments are inherently stressful. I can't take the stress out of it. But by kind of repatterning our thinking around it, we can re-engage with the stress in a different way and have a sustainable career that allows us to have more impact over a long term.
So when you started putting this book together, was it, always aimed at medical doctors and aimed, coming through the prism of the problem of burnout in the medical system?
This is where the formulation of the problem was. This was what I was seeing. I worked in a large healthcare system in a Boston area. I myself was experiencing burnout, and I was going into all these different medical units and clinics and seeing other providers who were burned out and talking to them and building my understanding of the problem through that day-to-day lived experience. Then through my own journey of, okay, I'm in this deep, dark hole, and how am I going to dig my way out? And what other traditions am I pulling in? I'm pulling in yoga here. I'm pulling in Stoic philosophy here. I'm pulling in some thought work here. I'm pulling in, various different things, trying to put that together in a way that helps those really concrete, really scientific, really kind of like, fix it kind of right-brained people, or left-brained, maybe I don't know the sides of the brain here, but anyway, like really concrete people into more of the expansive thinking and trying to sort of let go of some of the, need to control and need to understand that intersection is the place where I live. So I am, yes, inherently kind of aimed at the healthcare worker mindset, because I'm kind of working from a person who starts from that place of, like, I know how the body works and I can fix the body and I've studied science. Fix it, fix it, fix it. Kind of a very cerebral type of person, and recognizing that they need a different skill set in order to allow them to not be burned out.
It's an interesting juxtaposition there in a sense, because we're also we're talking about implementing a blueprint, but at the same time also kind of first maybe letting go of certain ways and certain fixated methods that one might have for many different reasons, in order to discover the right blueprint or the relevant blueprint for you at that moment in your life, in order to create something new and move on to something new. The reason I asked about medical doctors, and of course, we spoke about the audience of the show and all the different professions that we tailor education towards. But it's I mean, in essence, it is like this could be looked at and be relevant, all of the same things for any other healthcare professional out there.
Absolutely. I think that, we speak in the specific, but then it becomes generalizable. So in the book, I tell specific stories about my lived experience and the people that I watched, right, that I saw and interacted with. But that so many people in so many different fields have said, I've seen myself in the stories, whether they're teachers, whether they're just, moms or elder caregivers or other types of healthcare professionals, even law enforcement. Lots of people can kind of see themselves in this struggle of, I want to help people, and I'm happy to sort of give of myself in service to helping others and caregiving, and that's eating me alive, right? Because I don't really have some internal structures to do that in a way that isn't all consuming.
And do you think there's an overrepresentation of that type of person in, who's like in the medical doctor field?
It definitely selects for that personality.
Yeah. And I mean, it also kind of, just like, hearing the story. I haven't been through medical school myself, but just hearing the stories, reading books and, seeing it in movies, it just, if you're so engrossed in something for so many years, like who has time to implement and think of other blueprints out there?
Oh, it's absolutely true. And I think that we are really missing some critical elements of medical education, especially in the information age, where so much of what I studied in medical school, having to memorize lists of diseases and drug mechanisms and enzymes and all these things that I memorized and spent a lot of my time and energy memorizing, is now at my fingertips, right? I can just ask. ChatGPT actually does a great job answering fact-based medical questions. Now, that doesn't mean ChatGPT is a good doctor. It just means it can answer the fact-based medical questions. So that, to me, that means doctoring means the other stuff, right? How do I do this in a sustainable fashion? How do I maintain the compassion? How do I maintain good communication skills so that people know they're being taken care of by a human, not a machine? And that's really left out of a traditional medical curriculum, and part of why I think we're seeing so much burnout in physicians. It's also left out of nursing curriculum. It's built into other kind of allied health fields a little bit more. I know social work certainly gets a good dose of looking inward before you start caring outward. But in medical school, and certainly in nursing school curriculum, that's not really the structure. I mean, I think even in business education, they say manage yourself first. Like, everybody else understands you have to kind of do some inside work before you can start doing some outside work, except medicine and nursing, we skipped that part and never did it.
So yeah, it's so interesting. And did you see any glimpses of it while you're working in those crazy and dynamic environments?
You look for the success stories, right? So we try to pick out the mentors or the people who seem to be doing things well and then study the successes. How is it that you're able to go to work and have a family and still be a happy person and still sleep and not be running yourself into the ground? So there were few. But then that's the sort of exceptions that prove the rule, right? The fact that I'm like, oh, Dr. So-and-so, she really has it figured out. She stands out because the background is people who are all kind of miserable. The really hard part about it, though, is that we're also really good at hiding things. Most people who go into medicine are very high functioning people whose starting point is 1,000, right? So sometimes I talk about if you start at 100 and you lose 1% per day, it only takes you 100 days to be at zero if you're not ever doing any kind of renewal. Well, most physicians are starting at like 1,000. So we can like get down and down and down and down and down and be functioning for ourselves at less than 10% capacity, but it may look to the outside world like we're just doing great. And that's the piece that I often try to help the clients that I work with to catch, like, yeah, you're still functioning. I mean, you're not dysfunctional in society's terms of it, but you could be doing so much more if you just renewed yourself, allowed yourself to kind of have some boundaries, have good communication strategies, actually rest when you need rest. That's the kind of stuff that is the Phoenix blueprint. And then the other thing you said that's absolutely right is we can't build the blueprint until we get the foundation right. So if you think about even this in the most basic metaphor of a blueprint of a house, that's all the stuff that's built on the foundation, right? Somebody has to come and pour the slab, or somebody has to lay those bricks or dig down the earth or whatever it is. And then the house, that's the blueprint, starts building on top of that. So a lot of what I talk about in the book are those foundational things like taking rest, learning how to set boundaries, self-study, really getting to know yourself. Most people never took that time. Like, even when I say, well, like, what are your strengths? People are like, I don't know, I'm a hard worker. So it is kind of going back to basics in a lot of ways.
It's I've been feeling it, kind of ever since I've really joined the adult, life, and I started choosing myself when to go see, my family doctor, and not being determined by when my mum decides I go. So you start forming some sort of relationship now with your healthcare provider, really for the first time, at least for me, and I've heard this from other people too. And then you start realizing that maybe what your mom thought is a good doctor for you, or maybe what you thought was a good doctor for you when you were 15 is just not the same as it is today. So maybe you start looking elsewhere for other options. And then you start realizing that there is, like, you have to make a decision at the end of the day in terms of who it is I'll use the word trust. I don't want to use. I don't think it's less about but more about, because usually people would ask, like, did you like the doctor? But I think below that, the like is really an element of trust.
Yes.
Because we assume that the doctor will know what's wrong with us. And we don't know what's wrong with us, so we assume the doctor will know what's wrong with us and tell us. When you start realizing that it's not always the case, that the doctor doesn't know everything all the time, it's a bit of a wake-up call, and for the layman to actually start looking within and start connecting with the self and start learning about the self, so that you can even have a chance of kind of knowing, which doctor out there is speaking, your language. So I just know that it's something that I've always felt. So, I mean, and I think a big part of at least the mainstream discussion and a lot of times also I think criticism of medical doctors, from a high level view is came, as the COVID being the catalyst. Yes. As well. Like now it's so normal, and I don't like this, but it's like normal to criticize, criticize your doctor like everyone else knows everything and the doctor doesn't.
Yes.
Whereas before, I think there was a lot more respect and but also maybe coming from a naive / ignorant place of just assuming that the doctor always knows everything. So I'm saying all that to ask you if, like, kind of you felt, also that in communicating with patients, if you kind of ever felt that part of it, and is that something that's maybe difficult for the doctor to even think about handling with all the chaos that's going on around? Is it even an option to think about that on a mass scale if you are seeing so many patients on a daily basis?
This is an amazing question. I
Yeah,
love
good. I'm glad you helped me understand that it
all
was kind of a question.
all of what you've said and kind of how it is from the patient's perspective and how things have shifted over the years, really catalyzed by, the COVID times, are things that doctors and the healthcare system in general are really grappling with right now. And this loss of authority, absolute authority. So what you described of, like, I go to the doctor and I believe whatever they say, no questions asked. That's sort of a relationship of absolute authority, right? I'm the doctor and you're the patient. There's definitely a power differential. I know more than you. You're just coming to me to receive information and you're going to do what I tell you and then everything's going to be fine. That's kind of how we practice medicine for a long time. And I don't know that was great, but that's the way that there was problems with that paradigm as well, right? But that was kind of the paradigm that we practiced in. And that's a paradigm I was trained in initially. And so the job of the doctor was to acquire information and then make decisions and then tell the patient and give the patient what they needed, whether that was a medication or a surgery or whatever that they needed. As we have progressed and patients have become more empowered, information has become more available, patients are becoming more of a partner in the conversation. So we developed something called shared decision-making, which is I, as a doctor, am an expert on the facts, right? I know the biology and the physiology and how the drugs work and what I think's going on in your body. And then you're an expert on your life. So this is where you're looking inward piece does come into play, because when I'm going to say, well, you could have A or B, A has this benefit and this side effect, and B has this benefit and this side effect, you have to be able to assess those as the patient and decide which one is better for you. Each one has like benefit and burden. There's trade-offs in both one, and the patient's the only one that can say which trade-off is the most agreeable. So that's kind of shared decision-making model. And then now, yes, we have led to distrust model where, like you said, everyone now is like cynical about doctors. They think everything a doctor's, not everyone, but this is a certain part of the population, think that doctors are motivated by nefarious forces, whether it's big pharma or whoever, the COVID gods or whatever it is that has come into our cultural understanding that doctors are not operating from good intention as an assumption, right? It's not assumed that we're operating good intent. It's kind of judged. Maybe you're not really thinking about my best interests. You might be out for the money, or you might be motivated by something else.
Or just not paying too much attention into me as an individual.
Right. Or you're so worried about, there's so many other distractions, right? With the insurance company and health record and so many patients that it just feels like I'm just another number, right? Yes, that definitely is there. And so I think then what we find ourselves in is that is a soup that harms every single person in it. Like the patients are being harmed because they don't feel like their doctor cares about them, either neutral, like you just don't even think about me, or you're actually trying to hurt me. Like one of those two beliefs is there. The doctors are there saying, I'm doing my best. Why does everybody think that I'm trying to hurt them? Or why does everybody think I don't care about them? I'm doing, like, doctors feel like they're over giving. And yet the way that's being received is you don't care about me. There's not enough people to go around, right? Everybody's like, well, I'm trying to find a doctor, but I can't find a doctor. And that's terrible. And what are all these doctors doing? Why is every doctor burned out? It seems like they never work because you can't ever find one when you need one. So this whole thing is just like everybody's caught in it and nobody's winning. And we really do need kind of a big solution to solve it. But of course, big solutions take a long time. But recognizing all those forces is part of what I try to do with, things like my book and the blog that I write. And I just started a podcast as well, just to try to kind of like untangle some of that and like coming on your podcast so we can talk about it, any way that we can kind of start to point that out, so that it's not just an us versus them. It has to be all of us against the problem kind of philosophy.
Because as individuals, most people have problems or will have problems, and we need healthcare. And we're on the same team.
We need healthcare. That's right. Yeah. But I think the other piece that's in there is a big shift within physicians themselves and within what it means to be a physician. One is the information age. I already mentioned it. As people can Google and now people can ask AI, do they need their physician to be the diagnostic genius? No, they do not. So physicians can no longer identify by their intelligence or by their information, right? We can't gatekeep the information. Everybody has it. It's not like the only way to know what a disease is to go to a doctor. Now everybody can know what a disease is. So that's not how we can't define ourselves by that. We probably never should have been in the first place, but we used to. We did. Like, I'll just be honest. So identity was wrapped up in having knowledge that not everybody else had, being a place where people had to come for the knowledge, and then having the respect that came along with that. So we have to kind of separate from that. And then the other piece is the being able to say we don't know and really embrace the humanity of ourselves. You mentioned, you've now kind of framed it as like, maybe this was naive for me to think my doctor had all the answers. But so many people, when you're sick, when you are in a bad place, you want that person in front of you to know what they're doing, right? It's kind of threatening if they were like, well, I don't really know. This is a big mystery, this human machine. I can't take it apart and put it back together. So like, how am I going to figure this out?
Yeah.
That wouldn't really be very reassuring if that was what your doctor said. But at the end of the day, that is actually perhaps the factual truth, because we are doing our best between the evidence we have, the pieces of evidence we can collect about you specifically, if we do a lab test or an x-ray or whatever. But then at some point, there's a gap. Like there's a leap of faith between what we absolutely know and how we're going to act. And this is the part no one likes to acknowledge. Patients don't like to acknowledge it, and providers don't like to acknowledge it.
It's almost easier if it is disregarded for everyone.
Right. Like, oh no, we're certain. We know you have this problem and this is the solution for it, and just do it and it will be okay. And I think what things like COVID have highlighted is that was never true. We were pretending that it was true, that we were pretending that we knew things. And then when it became clear that we didn't actually know some things, or sometimes we speak with certainty about things that are uncertain, that kind of does erode that trust. I actually would prefer and do teach people to be honest about the things that they don't know and enter into that shared decision model with patients and say, none of us know. It's not like I don't know because there's something wrong with me as a professional. The world does not know the answer to these questions. So we are together walking into this unknown space. Is that okay with you? Or which unknown space feels like the most comfortable for you? I work right now in end-of-life care. I have some people who would rather the unknown space of walking towards death than moving into the unknown space of taking chemotherapy. So should they get a cancer diagnosis, for example, right? So that's a choice. Both of those are unknown spaces. You take chemotherapy, you may or may not get cured of your cancer. You don't take chemotherapy, probably your cancer is going to progress and you're going to die. There's a lot of unknowns on both sides, but that patients can be brought into the conversation, and I think need to, because this is a weird paradox we have. The more information we get, the more we're actually forced to face the uncertainty. We're like, we cannot pretend we have certainty anymore because it's just becoming more clear.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I was trying to remember, for me, it's like, for anyone really, the first time that you hear maybe something that you didn't like to hear from your doctor, let's say that you have to get a surgery ASAP. So you decide to go for a second opinion because that's what either your parents or your friends told you to do. So you go for a second opinion, and then you're seeing two medical doctors who have the same qualifications, both went to top schools, both are in the same city, both are just as the same, 4.8 star reviews, are both giving you different answers. So that's for the patient, it becomes very confusing.
Yes.
So it's and I guess when it's something like COVID, where it's so like left or right, and then it's just and it was so ubiquitous, right? Not everyone gets knee surgery. Not 300 million people get knee surgery, but 300 million people were administered, a vaccine type thing. So it was like in everyone's faces. So it's really interesting. But for you, when did you realize that, okay, I'm burnt out? Was it like, a certain day where you woke up and like, this is too much, or do you really feel the grind just wearing you out over time?
Yes. In retrospect, I can say I was burned out from my second year of medical school until a time when I had a big crash, which was about 15 years after I graduated medical school. So there was some degree of burnout, which is that like smoldering stuff that we see from almost every healthcare worker now, where so you're just like, does this person even like their job? Like they seem like they hate it, and they hate like, and then as a patient, you're like, it seems like they hate me. That is pervasive, and that was present with me for the most of that entire time. I did experience a big crash, and that was what really led me to say, this is now burnout. This is a crisis. It felt like grief. So, which was actually helpful that I could name it as that, because it set me on the path towards the right type of healing. But what happened for me was that I was overperforming, as that's the skill we pull out. When times get hard, we overperform. Oh, let me just take on more of the shifts myself. Let me just think harder about this problem. Let me like make more systems so that I can deal with all of, too many patients, not enough time, and kids and health, all the things, right? So all the plates are spinning, but I'm just going to get better at being a plate spinner. Everything's fine. And then rugs started just being pulled out, until finally it got to a point where I was really at a breaking point, where I was yelling at patients in the clinic. I was snippy and snappy with everybody on my team, just really hyperreactive and just that kind of cynical mindset. And then people started to notice. And because that is quite different from my baseline personality, I think people were like, oh, something's wrong with you. But yeah, and then I got sent home. So I got a real wake up call when I was called into my supervisor's office and told that I just needed to leave, like get off a clinical service and don't come back for 6 weeks. Thankfully, that did not affect my medical license or anything in a permanent way, but was so severe that I was really in that hyperreactive state to a severe degree that it was considered to be dangerous, right? Like you're going to hurt somebody if we don't get you out of here. My words are my scalpel. So it would have been psychological harm that I could do, not physical harm, most likely. But you could imagine in other care settings where people could easily, I write prescriptions for heavy drugs. So I could easily have made a mistake in prescribing opioids or benzodiazepines or something that really could have hurt somebody. So when that got recognized by the outside, and the result of that was me being pulled off of clinical service for 6 weeks, that was rock bottom for me, because not only was I super fried, but then also the thing that was saving me, so to speak, like my profession was what I was so attached to, just got pulled out from me. Like the only thing I have going for me is that I'm a good doctor. And like now I got told I'm not a good doctor anymore. It was devastating. And that was when I sunk into, what is really severe burnout, but felt like depression, felt like grief. This is why these things are hard to discern. A lot of people talk about burnout and like, how do you know it's burnout and not depression? I'm like, well, a lot of times they look exactly identical. And that at the time, that was what I needed to do to recover. I needed to treat myself like I was grieving. I needed to treat myself and seek help from people who knew how to be in that space. And it was also important that I sought help from people who did understand the medical side. Sometimes when we're talking as medical professionals about the things that got us into the hole, we have to talk about really hard things. I mean, I take care of little kids with cancer and little kids who are dying. Sometimes that's really hard to hear about. And when you're the one who's trying to be healed, you don't want to think that the person you're talking to is being harmed by your conversation. So that's one of the other motivators that kind of got me into the space of being a helper, was that I can handle it, right? Like I can hear all the crazy stuff because I've seen it all myself. So people can feel like they have a little bit more of a safe space. But yeah, that's my side of the story when I got into the deep burnout. And a lot of those stories I was able to capture in the book. Just as a frame of reference, though, I wrote this book, I think 6 years after the events of it happened, in the most part. I mean, some of the later chapters where I talk about like day-to-day things that I observed happened along the way, but like the big crashes that were personal to me, it was a good amount of space. And that's how much space it took for me to be able to talk about those things in a way that was neutral enough that I could put it out into the world and come here and talk about it. When it's raw and when it's fresh, I always tell people, write about it. I wrote about it, but I wrote about it personal. I didn't write about it public when it was still really raw.
So yeah, it's pretty heavy. It's pretty heavy stuff. Did you notice it about yourself, like looking back, like creeping in, and you could have maybe realized at a sooner date before that, big crash moment?
Yeah, the thing that I noticed was definitely things were off, or that I was unsatisfied, but that I was doing the upside down approach where I was trying to fix the blueprint before I fixed the inside, or trying to fix the lifestyle without fixing doing the inner work. And so I would say, oh yeah, I need to change my hours, or I need to have one extra day off a week so that I can take care of my kids, or I need to get a second babysitter so that my kids are covered more time, right? Like all of this, like just moving little stuff around, thinking that was what was going to solve my problem. So I had some degree of awareness that my life was unsustainable, but had no awareness that the real problem was like in my relationship with the world. It was all circumstantial. If I just find the right childcare strategy, everything will be good. That kind of logic was what was going through my mind.
Looking back, and I want to ask you about like the future from, after that 6-week period, or, after you kind of made that transition and, went through that grief. But do you think, like, also looking back, that there are actions you could have taken then in the hectic environment, but yes, still operate and make it sustainable in the hectic blueprint of that you were in?
It's a tough question, because I think that personally I was in a very rigid environment in which, although I was trying to solve it with surface level things, I kept running into roadblocks. So for example, one solution I had, which may have been due to a misguided intent, but probably would have been a good thing to do, was, could I work part-time, right? Can I go to half-time? So instead of working essentially 60 hours a week, can I just work 30 hours a week? That will give me more time to do things. Had I been allowed to do that, and then had I filled the time with actual self-care activities like, resting, doing self-study, helping myself build boundaries, developing good communication strategies, and whatever technology you want to use to do that, whether you like yoga or meditation or journaling or just want to take a nap, that's not it. If I had filled the time with something equally as distracting, if I had said, oh, good, now I only doctor 30 hours, I'm going to go volunteer at my kid's school, and I'm going to go start a community service project, and I'm going to go, start a side business, I don't think that would have helped.
But it was more foundational. It was a foundational thing that you had to discover. It was
foundational, right? So the time might have helped. Unfortunately, I ran into the roadblock that I got told you can't work half time. I actually had a sort of mini crash before, where I said, can I work part-time? And they said, yes, thank you, put in your resignation. And I'm like, wait, what? I just asked for half-time. Why you got to go to zero? But that this was kind of this is part of the problem we have. The systems problem is we don't really have, in a lot of workplaces the flexibility to allow people to work in ways that work with their lives. And that's why a lot of people are leaving healthcare or leaving workforce altogether across the board of the traditional workplaces. And we see a rise of a lot of these, flexible workplaces. So I think that's what people need. So anyway, had that happened, I think that would have been really helpful. Had I been able to find someone who could teach me how to disengage from the identity of over-identifying with my patients and over-identifying with my role as the savior, that would have been transformational. That's a question I hold in my mind a lot. Can you get to that without a crash in between? Because I think if I just met some 21-year-old pre-med and said, you know what, if you hold yourself up as like goddess in a white coat and you're here to save humanity, 20 years from now, you're going to have a huge crash and you might die. They'd be like, no, lady, you don't know what you're talking about. Right. So that's a piece that I'm not sure if, like, in order to understand it, you have to live through it. The goals for me, what is possible for me now, and what I hope to make possible for other people, is that the cycle time is shorter. Like, we are definitely going to have crashes. We're going to have things that really poke us in the heart. Either something happens with a patient or something happens with an insurance company. Some degree of moral injury occurs. We get poked in the heart. Can you recover from it in a reasonable time frame that allows you to keep doing your thing? Or does that just like crash you down, which is what happened to me before, so like having the skills to be able to recover from the stresses is the goal in my mind. That's kind of the end point. If you're living on the Phoenix blueprint, you can do hard things and then you can recover from the hard things, and you have this kind of flow, like a regenerative type of strategy, whether you say, I think the Phoenix metaphor would not be a daily cycle. We can't get burned to the ground and then reborn on a daily basis. That's more of a longer term regeneration cycle. But thinking about, on daily basis, you have stress and then you recover from that stress. There's lots of good natural metaphors that show us how to do that. Recognizing that we need to do that and we are not robots who don't have human body needs is the kind of one of the main mindset shifts that, if I could have installed that earlier, may have prevented me from the crash that I had.
So, and this is just, opinion based, but what do you think, so if those principles are installed in you year one of medical school, what do you think that does? Maybe along the way, people realize that, so it just doesn't go together. Medical school and human needs just doesn't go together. Just like being a gold medalist in the Olympics and human needs doesn't go together. You have to work out 8 hours a day, every day. You know what I mean? It's like, so you're not going to live a normal, balanced life, period, because you're in a way sacrificing that to win a gold medal or to make it through medical school.
Yes, I think that is that is actually the current prevailing opinion, is that human needs and doctoring, maybe even other types of things, but definitely for physicians, do not coexist. You must be willing to sacrifice in order to have this. There are over 1 million physicians in the United States alone. This is not a sustainable strategy. We have to find 1 million people willing to sacrifice their humanity, and we have a shortage. We have a shortage already.
Yeah.
Now we have to find 1.5 million people willing to sacrifice their humanity. It's just not a good strategy. It can't be true.
Yeah.
We have to find a different way.
Yeah. So agreed. But assuming the system isn't changing, right? So like, what does one do? And then, like, what would you do today as a year 1, year 2 medical student in order to grow within the system in the best balanced way possible to, hope for a sustainable career, but assuming the system isn't, because as you mentioned in the beginning, like, it's going to change the system, they're going to have to find a concrete solution, and then the implementation will take God knows how many years to implement, and then God knows how many years to actually adopt it. as part of the new system. So today, someone starting medical school in a few months, what do they do?
What do they do? Well, it's tricky. It is tricky because of the power differential, right? Like when you're really at the bottom of the hierarchy, trying to change upward has so many challenges. Not only that you're having this sort of revolutionary mindset shift from the mass, you're also like the person who has no power in the situation. So obviously we need people who are at the top of the power hierarchy to change their minds as well. However, the question is, if I was starting medical school, knew everything I knew now, like somehow had a Freaky Friday situation or something where I'm going back into the body of a first-year medical student, the way to accomplish it has to be, you have to have skills in communication and negotiation, because you cannot just say, well, path of least resistance, I'm going to do what they tell me to do because I'm at the bottom of the power hierarchy. That's how what we're doing now. You're going to say, I have human needs. Doctors should have human needs. Here's how the medical system is actually better if we all embraced our human needs and all became this, different kind of way of being with people. And you have to be able to not only live that, but also be able to tell people a good story about why that aligns with what is they want. One of the counter story to this is, and there was something that's going around, somebody tweeted this week, like, doctors need to stop complaining that they work too much, like that's the job, if you didn't want it you shouldn't have chose that. Well, that's a really toxic statement, but it is kind of the prevailing belief in our society. So in order to speak against that, you have to have an alternative story that also paints a picture of good medical care. One that I might choose is like, your way is not working. Like, look at the mess we have created, right? So tell me how, show me, put the burden of proof back onto the old people, if you will. Tell me how it is that the current structure that we have created is creating good care. Why are you fighting so hard to keep the thing that is not working? How about we try something different? This is sort of the young versus old, tale as old as time, right? Like, my way is better. No, my way is better. But if the truth is that the way we're doing it is not working, no one would look at U.S. healthcare right now, except in small pockets, right? Again, but then that's exception that proves the rule, and say, yeah, this is success. Like, we have got it. I don't know we could find a person that would say that.
Yeah. So, it's I still, I want to take us back to to the individual who's on the beginning of their journey, because you are, as a medical doctor, and I can only imagine what it is to be, but as someone who's starting their journey to become a medical doctor, it's like you're going to sacrifice, you're going to work hard, you're barely going to sleep, you're going to do all these crazy things in order to make it. Can you still do all those things? Because again, you can choose maybe to be a bit more of a independent, amongst your group, and you can choose to maybe divert from the group a little bit. But politically speaking, maybe that's not the right decision for you, because every single time you won't get the rotation you want, you won't get this, because they just won't pick you, like in any other system or whatever have you. So what does one do, who wants to play the game, the political game of sacrificing and making it, until they have a bit more leverage, until they have a permanent base or permanent job where maybe they can start changing the environment around them? So until they get to that point, what can they do? Like, how would you advise? And I think it's probably whatever you say is also advice to anyone else in a hectic environment that they're sacrificing maybe some of their principles, some of their ideals, some of their human needs. Anyone who's working till 9-10 p.m. in the office, anyone doing anything, is sacrificing their human needs. They're getting less sleep, they're getting less hugs from their partners, less time with their kids, eating less good food, most likely. So it's it's a lot of people, probably most, like really most people that are giving up, needs. So what are some things that we can, implement in our daily routines to make that sacrifice more sustainable, if you will?
Ooh, it's a hard question, because I think that there's hard work and dedication, and then there's sacrifice, which may be different constructs. Like, I think we do need to think about mutual benefit, and that the number of hours may not be the definition of mutual benefit, right? I have worked 100-hour weeks in which I was happy to do so, because it was very clear to me how that was part of my goals, right? I'm doing things that are helping me achieve my goals. So, I was actually happy, right? Thank goodness I have all of this time to be in front of patients. I'm learning so much, and I have this opportunity to take care of all of these people. So that wouldn't necessarily be sacrifice, in the sense that you clearly see how this is contributing to your goals, versus I have no idea how this is contributing to my goals. Someone else is telling me I have to do this, and I'm mad about it. And then, so that's just kind of one shift in kind of how we think about things. If you can find a story in which your actions are aligned with your objectives and your value system, then that's wonderful, right? Someone else I was talking to recently was saying, oh yeah, sometimes I pick up an extra shift that maybe I don't actually want to do, and it does take me away from my family, but one of the values I have is being a provider. And so extra shift means extra money. And so then I can really align with, I have some extra money that's helping my kids, even though my arms may not be there to hug them or to put them to sleep, right? I'm serving them in a different way. So connecting those dots, connecting to your own value system, is really an essential piece of this. And then falling in love with the process is also an essential piece. Do you believe in the mission strongly enough that you may never see the outcome of your actions? So that is also, a lot of people suffer because they say to themselves, well, okay, I'm willing to put in extra time, or really truly make a sacrifice, right? I'm willing to do something I don't want to do, because then it will have a payoff. But then some circumstance happens that's totally beyond their control, in which they don't get the payoff, and then they're mad about it. If we can be outside of that structure, if we can say, this process, I'm doing what I can to achieve the goal, and I recognize the goal may never be achieved, but I want to feel good knowing I've done what I can, that's the way to happiness. And I think that is in there. Am I doing a good job taking care of the patient in front of me, even though this whole healthcare system is a mess, or I'm advocating for a change to our payer system, and I'm taking the meetings, and I'm writing the new policy. And yeah, by the time it gets its way up to the top, somebody's going to shut that down, and this whole thing's going to be for nothing. But I can feel good knowing that I was doing my part to move that forward. And maybe in some future time, that's going to actually have an impact. But within that arc of, I was trying to get this bill passed, or I was trying to get this policy changed, and it didn't work, instead of like crushing you and saying, it's like, I have no purpose. So for medical students, I think that those two philosophies of, aligning it with, yes, it is a lot of work, and yes, it is a lot of sacrifice in terms of hours, but what's the benefit? But if you find yourself where the juice ain't worth the squeeze, get out. Like, do not stay. I'm not here to teach people how to stay in toxic situations. Like, that is not it. You need to be able to say, yes, there's this part that's pain and this part that's benefit, and the benefit to me is worth it. A lot of times we need help identifying that and kind of like tapping into, like, what is it that I actually value? Victim mentality is very seductive. It's like very easy to just feel put upon. And then we talk to our friends who also feel put upon, and they say, yeah, you're right, that guy is terrible. And we kind of cycle that way. But we really need to sort of cycle the other way and say, well, what are you getting out of the situation? And, how is it beneficial to you? Really bathing in the goodness of the situation, not in a like idiotic way, but in just really grounded. Everything has good and bad in it. And do we want to be the people who see the bad, or do we want to be the people who see the good?
So yeah, as you said, so really to bathe yourself with the good or the situation if it's a place you want to be at. What about identity? You mentioned identity and how, because most of your life as a student, medical student, is, and afterwards when you graduate, it's your whole life, right, for years and years and years. So you're basically adopting it as your new identity for
Yes.
maybe forever. So so how does one come to terms with that? How does one maintain an independent identity while being a medical doctor, or learning to become a medical doctor? It's difficult. And as someone who, I played soccer my entire life, and most of my life I was a soccer player, was my identity. I adopted it. People adopted it, labeled me with it. I only thought about it. I didn't care about anything else. That was my identity. And then when it's no longer there anymore, it is a bit confusing. And then, as you mentioned in the beginning, then you're forced to look in, and then you start, either you hit a foundation, or you start looking for a foundation and putting together your own foundation. But so someone might be a 22-year-old with an identity, their own authentic identity.
Yes.
They join medical, school. Along the way, they might lose it. So what does one do, in your opinion, to try and mitigate that loss?
Yeah, I think so the first thing is recognizing what's the harm in it, right? So when you adopt a singular identity so fully, as you so beautifully described with your soccer player identity, I adopted a physician identity, is fragile, right? It's like you have a table with one leg. It's very easy for it to fall over. If something happens to the one leg, we all of a sudden have nothing. So I do try to encourage people to maintain some degree of depth and breadth within themselves. Now, recognizing that may not be, we have to loosen our expectation of what that means to have a variety of identities and experiences. Maybe I once in a while, pick up a guitar and play it. Well, I don't have to adopt a whole identity as a rock star, but I can say, I play the guitar sometimes, or I like to cook, or explore wine, or I like to sing, or, I go to the whatever, I don't care, whatever you do. Just having some other things that you could say, I enjoy. So even maintaining some hobbies is very impactful, even if they're in a very small way, because it's true. I mean, the majority of your time is consumed by doing your job, learning to do your job and then doing your job. It doesn't allow a lot of time. You have to fight for it. I think you do have to fight for it, which means recognizing that the other way has its problems, right? So I think that's one piece that I would definitely recommend. And then the other kind of more existential piece is recognizing that even without any identities or any wrappers, you're good. You're good. There's a central core of goodness that no matter what it's wrapped up in is just inherent in everyone. And that is something I would love for all medical students, all people, but especially medical students to understand, because that not only allows you to treat yourself with more compassion and humanity, it allows you to treat your patients that way as well. Because if we treat a client, if I have someone sitting in front of me who has no job, can't walk, can barely speak, maybe can't even eat, what is their identity? What kind of identity am I assigning to them if I only have, the job you have and the production you do and the way that you interact with the world is only identities we understand? How do I connect with that person as an equal human being, right? That's going to make it very hard. I really want to encourage people to say, well, even if I couldn't be a doctor anymore, if I couldn't be an able-bodied person, if I couldn't have a smart mind and think, if I couldn't read, if I couldn't listen to make music or even listen to music, what then? And that people exist in that condition and they're still people. And you might be one of those people someday. So this element of compassion for the self and for the core of people is really been transformational for me. and has allowed me to take care of people who are in quite debilitated conditions in a way that is very different than the way that I took care of them before.
How has, with your messaging and everything you've been doing since you really kind of discovered this journey, within yourself, and being, maybe it took you a few years, but once you started being expressive about your thoughts and ideas and experiences, how have your colleagues reacted or accepted it? Ones that maybe personally, or even ones that you don't know personally, who have know you through someone or came across you through online or your book.
Yes, that's a really good question. I mean, it wasn't like, I will say that I kind of already had a reputation as a little bit divergent thinker because I am a person who takes care of end of life care. So like I already had stepped away from the very traditional thought patterns of medicine in the day-to-day work that I do. But then now, as I've stepped out, particularly as I start to talk about mindset work or more existential things, I mean, I do get a little bit of raised eyebrows, like, you're woo-woo-y now. You like, who are you? But I think most people say, thank you so much for saying this, right? This is stuff that we have known, we have felt for many, many years, but we didn't have words for it. We didn't have safety to put it out into the world. And that when you say it and I can see myself in it, then at least I know that I'm not the only person that has this problem. We can start having conversations about it. I think it still feels a little unsafe for people to really start to talk about it for themselves. But I think we're at least getting to, we can talk about it as a problem. I might not be ready to say I have that problem, but like we can at least talk about it as a problem. There's been quite a lot of acceptance in that way as I've started to talk about these things. I think that being able to tell the story has also been incredibly pivotal for a lot of people, because unless you were one of those people who was there during the really hard time that I went through, I have always presented as an incredibly positive, incredibly happy person. And so I think before I wrote the book, or before I started putting a lot of these harder stories out, there was a narrative like, well, of course it's easy for you to be happy as a doctor. You're just like inherently happy as a person. And then now that I've said, oh yes, but and see how I went down and I was in this process and I recovered from it. Yes, of course, I did have some foundation of just personality, happiness, the way I was raised, whatever it is, but that it starts to kind of shift the paradigm of it's just you're just lucky, versus, I could do that too. I could do that too. There's a recipe to it. There's a strategy, there's mindsets, there's practices, and that it is possible to do it. The other thing that people sometimes push back on me is like, well, your job is easy. And so of course it's easy for you to continue to practice medicine because you have an easy job. And I mean, just kind of laugh at it because I'm like, okay, well, if my job's easy, like you can come and work with me. I always say this to people. I'm like, we're hiring, you can come and work with me. And then people are like, oh no, I could never do that. That's too sad. I'm like, you just said my job was easy. Is it easy or is it hard? So there's a lot of excuses that people like to try to give people's minds, right? In their fight to hold on to their stories. They give all these excuses about why they can't have the good life, why they can't have the different way. It is hard. You are going to have to be countercultural. You are going to have to disrupt some hierarchies and sort of make yourself a little bit uncomfortable for a time. There may be some major changes you have to make in your life, or there may not. Maybe it's not that you have to quit your job and move and blow up your entire life. That sometimes that's the false dichotomy, that people think I'm unhappy now, and so the only way I will get to happiness is by changing every single thing about my life. Well, that's often not true either.
Yeah, sometimes it's just eat more, or you start eating less, or you start standing like outside a couple times a day during your shift. Like sometimes it's not as right. It doesn't have to be as extreme as
Exactly.
starting a new career or giving up on life. So it's and maybe, and also, I think that's a good message in general, is just trying like little harmless things that don't need any evidence behind them, like going to g- walking 5 minutes to a cafe to get a coffee instead of the Starbucks in the hospital maybe is a better option for you without any science backing it, but just to go for a 5 minute walk. And maybe that'll help. And I think a lot of us are very arrogant in our routines and our ways, including me. And and it's like what we think works doesn't work as well as it works, and what we think doesn't work doesn't not work
Yes.
as well as we think it doesn't work. So we should always and so having those new moments of a 5 minute walk or standing on the balcony for 5 minutes gives you a chance or a glimpse into that introspection of maybe looking at yourself through an objective lens, or the lens of the true identity that's inside you, that you could maybe meet yourself earlier before
Yes.
hitting, a brick wall, as you mentioned. So those little bits and pieces are important, and it's like reps in the gym, or
Yes.
it type
Yes.
thing.
I love
Yeah,
that. And although I say you can't necessarily solve the problem by the surface things that take care of your body mind, right? Brain health is body health. So things like sunshine, sleep, water, adequate nutrition, like these are just the super basics. And that although those are small things, they are foundational things, right?
yeah.
Which will allow the inner work to happen. Versus I much rather someone spend 10 minutes taking a walk than 10 minutes trying to rearrange their calendar so that they can fit one more meeting into their day.
Or a walk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or fit a walk in,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, where am I going to schedule the walk? Like, just go do the walk. Yeah, love that idea.
No, for sure, for sure. And it's with all the the last point on the like the routines, and just set ways is kind of what just makes all of us kind of ignore opportunities out there, and red flags out there, and green flags, and everything else. My last question to you, Emma, before we wrap up the episode, is one that I actually ask every guest on the show, is what is in, and I think you answered a couple of these maybe along the way, but maybe you have a biggie that you can share with us, professionally or personally. But what is something that you fundamentally changed your mind on over the years, that maybe in the past you thought X and now you think Y about? And the reason I'm asking is we're pushing the idea of not being dogmatic about anything, especially if you're young and are set in your ways. Then to hear from our guests different things that they've changed their mind on over the years.
Yeah, I've changed my mind on probably just about everything, and now adopt an attitude that changing my mind is the whole point. Like, thank goodness my mind is changeable. Like, what a fun toy to have. But a big one that's very pertinent to the work that I do is that I no longer believe that empathy is a positive quality. So this may be divisive for a last question, but
I like it already.
That empathy, without boundaries, is actually quite dangerous for us psychologically. So we feel other people's feelings, right? This is what it is to have empathy. And when you're exposed to people who are in a lot of suffering, that means that you are suffering all day long, and that's actually very bad place to be, right? Why am I purposely putting myself into suffering on a regular basis? And how could I ever imagine that I could be thriving as a person if that's what I was doing? So all these years when I was being told to empathize with my patients, and I was doing that and believing that if they were suffering, I was also suffering, and that made me a good clinician, I now have turned that on its head and said, no, that's absolutely the wrong thing to do. I can see their suffering, I can witness it, I can acknowledge it, and then I can meet it with love. And I need to meet it with love and helpfulness, in that I need to be able to stay in that. So that's the boundary, right? Like I have to be able to say, that's yours and I'm over here. I'm not a robot that's unfeeling. I have feelings, and I like the sadness or the pain or the whatever suffering that you're having comes in, but I just let it move through so that I can stay in love and helpfulness and rationality and functionality. Because the other thing, I was talking to someone who worked in the ER the other day, and I was like, if you really empathize with your patients, you're taking on their emotional state. What is the emotional state of every person coming in? And he was like, oh my gosh, overwhelmed, panicked, frustrated. I was like, that's the mindset, that's the heart set you want to be making decisions from about their healthcare? And he was like, oh no, that's bad. So I think that recognizing that what we really mean is we want to be able to acknowledge other people's lived experience, and that's what's sort of talked about as empathy, but that we really don't want to take on their feelings. We want to sort of have what I would say is compassion, where we see their suffering but really stay in a loving presence towards them instead of collapsing into their emotional state.
Definitely one I will think about,
Yes.
and ponder over. No, definitely unexpected. But that's good. Another purpose of this is to get us all to think.
I know.
And
Don't put a soundbite that says Dr. Jones doesn't want people to have empathy. Like, that's not the point.
Yeah. No, but it has a price, and also maybe from a certain threshold, it has a very high price, as well. So that's so definitely one worth thinking about. So, Dr. Emma Jones, thank you. I appreciate it. It was fun. Please tell people where they can find, your website, your book, and different things you have going on.
Perfect. The book is available anywhere you buy books, in either paperback or audiobook. And the best place to figure out what I'm doing and how you can work with me is on my website, emmajonesmd.com is the most up to date.
And new podcast you mentioned?
Yes, I just started a podcast. We had our first episode, second one to drop soon. It's called the Hauer Hour, in honor of one of our beloved palliative care doctors, Dr. Julie Hauer. And we talk about gentle power and everyday leadership, kind of how do you live in this different way that I've been describing and actually do that day to day.
Fantastic. So good luck with the podcast.
Thank you.
I appreciate it very much. And that was very fun. So enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend in Boston.
You too. So nice to have a conversation with you. It's fun.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Emma.